Chapter 5, The Iron Age. We're continuing the apocalypse of Yajnavalkya. If you guys are enjoying this audiobook, please let me know in the comments or leave me a thumbs up on the video. I plan to keep on reading through it because so far it's been a really fascinating read. For 1,200 years, humans struggled in the harsh, Younger Dryas conditions brought about by supernova debris hitting the Earth, which caused all manner of fire and flood around the globe, as the Atlanteans had warned it would. Then, as prophesied, the long-tailed heavenly climbing star returned, streaking across the Earth's atmosphere before exploding in a fiery airburst. Although the meteor brought about more devastation in its path, it also reversed the inhospitable ice age conditions and pushed the world into a warming trend that marked the early Iron Age. But unlike the last warming trend, this one did not bring about an easy or joyful life. According to Ovid, this age is marked by an existence of toil and misery in which the powerful ruled and the ancient custom of Xenia, offering protection and hospitality to strangers, was abandoned. The gods forsook humanity during this age, as humans no longer felt shame or indignation at wrongdoing. Truth, modesty, and loyalty were nowhere to be found, for greed, war, and impious ruled the minds of men. The second cosmic cataclysm. Humans had begun as children after the first cataclysm, and those in the path of the second event had to start over once more. As with the upheaval that opened the Bronze Age, humans across the globe who survived retold their experiences in legends that have been passed down for millennia. Corroborating myths. Most of the extant flood myths refer to the beginning of the Bronze Age, but the Iron Age began with a cosmic event and flood of its own. The meteor entered the atmosphere over present-day Mongolia and then streaked westward over Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the rest of North Africa, burning everything in its path. Then it exploded over the Atlantic, sending shockwaves and debris crashing into the ocean, which triggered more underwater mudslides, more tidal waves, and thus the stories of the second flood. The cascading impacts reached as far as Dvaraka, India, the city described by Enoch, which was destroyed by a tidal wave and now rests 30 feet underwater. Various cultures have preserved the events of the time in their stories. Following the path of the comet, the story of Era and Isham records the experience farthest east in Mesopotamia, while Ovid's Metamorphosis records of the events in Greece. A Matamuskete legend recounts the destruction on the eastern seaboard of what is now the United States, and the Mahabharata describes the sinking of Dvaraka. Unlike the global catastrophe that initiated the Bronze Age, the destruction of this event was more localized to the path traveled by the debris. Mesopotamia. As described earlier, prior to the onset of the first cataclysm 12,800 years ago, the Atlanteans had made every effort to warn people of the coming destruction, even going so far as to tell them exactly where to hide in order to save themselves. However, many of the primitive peoples assumed that because the Atlanteans were, quote-unquote, gods, they were in control and were actually sending punishment upon sinful human beings. You will recall that the Atrahasis, one of the Mesopotamian creation myths, relates that after humanity was created to be laborers for the gods, Enlil, the fallen watcher chief, visited plagues and other disasters upon humanity every 1,200 years to reduce their number, a concern with population control shared by the descendants of Nephilim to this day. It is no coincidence that 1,200 years is the precise interval of time between the opening and closing of the Younger Dryas, a period that saw extensive destruction of human life. Primitive societies noted this timing and assumed they were being punished in alignment with their cultural mythos and the natural events occurring around them. You hear that, all you Christians that think God is punishing everyone because you're evil, sinful people? It's not how it went down. The legend about Era and Isham discusses a completely different disaster from the Atrahasis, not at all associated with the creation of humanity, but rather an allegorical depiction of the airbust that ended the Younger Dryas period. In this account, Era, a militaristic warrior god of potent destructive power, feels restless and wants to unleash his power on humanity. He approaches the supreme god Marduk, a representation of the sun, and remarks on how his appearance no longer radiates as it used to, saying his raiment and garments are dirty. This dimming refers to the sky at the time, which is filled with debris from the nuclear winter, blotting out the sun. Era tells Marduk that humans no longer give the gods the proper reverence and that Marduk should unleash him to remind humanity of their power. Marduk eventually gives him leave to gather his 7 unrivaled warriors called the Sebidi, and they march off to annihilate an entire countryside. Even the gods are astounded by the destruction wrought by Era. As the legend goes, Isham set out for the mountain Sharshar, the 7 peerless warriors following behind him. At the mountain Sharshar, the warriors arrived. He raised his hand and destroyed the mountain. The mountain Sharshar he turned into a void. He felled the trees of the forest of cedar. The woodland looked as if traversed by the deluge. He took control of the towns and made them deserts. He destroyed the uplands and slew their flocks. He roiled the oceans and wiped out their produce. He laid waste reed beds and woodlands and burned them like fire. He cursed the livestock and turned them to dust. The power of Era manifests as an indiscriminate blast wave that levels forests, which was exactly the effect of the airbust. The translation, however, conceals a secret meaning only understood if read in the original cuneiform script. You will recall the twin gods of destruction, Salat and Hannes, who were used to describe the destruction wrought at the beginning of the Bronze Age. Hannes's destructive force is once again invoked in this passage to describe the devastated landscape. Once noted scholar and translator of many ancient works from Mesopotamia likened the image of Hannes's power to probably one of trees flattened by gale. There can be no doubt that this is a description of the shock wave created by the meteor as it traveled through the atmosphere. Greece. The Greek accounts of the destruction come from Ovid's long story, the metamorphosis. Rivers boiled from the Ganges all the way to the Atlantic, showing the meteor entered the atmosphere over India, swept across Africa, exploded, and caused more undersea mudslides and tidal waves. Everything in the meteor's path, cities, forests, and even frozen lands, burned, leaving nothing behind. The highest altitudes are caught in flames. As their moistures dry, they crack in chasms. The grass is blighted, trees are burnt up with their leaves, the ripe brown crops give fuel for self-destruction. Oh, what small complaints! Great cities perish with their walls, and peopled nations are consumed to dust. The forests and the mountains are destroyed. Ovid identifies the source of these all-consuming flames. Pantheon, a child of the sun god Helios. He flew over North America, set it ablaze, and caused such a conflagration on earth that Zeus intervened and killed him with one of his thunderbolts. Ovid's depiction of the airburst that then caused Neptune's flood. Jove, in parentheses, Zeus, or Jove, Jove, and then it says Zeus in parentheses, having reached that summit, stood and poised in his almighty hand a flashing dart, and hurling it, deprived of life and seat the youthful charioteer, and struck with fire the raging flames. And by the same great force, those flames enveloping the earth were quenched, and he who caused their fury lost his life. The wrath of love was not content with powers that emanate from heaven. He brought to aid his azure brother, lord of flowing waves, who called upon rivers and streams, and Neptune, with his trident, smote the earth with trembling and unwonted throes, heaved up the sources of her waters bare, and through her open plains the rapid rivers rushed resistless onward, bearing, and through her open, onward bearing the waving grain. The budding groves, the house sheep and men and holy temples and their sacred urns, the mansions that remained resisting vast and total ruin, deepening waves concealed and whelmed their tottering turrets in the flood and whirling gulf. And now one vast expanse, the land and sea were mingled in the waste of endless waves, a sea without a shore. That's quoting the book of Metamorphosis. In fact, the last couple were quoting the book of Metamorphosis. Clement of Alexandria says the burning of the Pantheon and the flood of Deucalion occurred at the same time, under the rule of Crodopus, the 8th king of Argos. Societies kept time in their rulers, noting in which year of the reign of which king a historical event occurred, whereas the flood of Ogyges happened in the time of Phoronius, the mythical first king of Argos and contemporary of Erechtheus, and Pantheon and Deucalion accounts make clear that time passed between the two cosmic events, and there were two separate floods. Thus, Clement of Alexandria confirms the dating of these myths from Ovid. The second flood and second cosmic disaster are related to each other, but separate from the catastrophe that occurred 1,200 years earlier. After the giant meteor broke into thousands of pieces in the airburst, those still sizable fragments continued their momentum across the Atlantic as told in a Matamuskeet Native American legend about the formation of the Matamuskeet Lake as a result of a smaller impact from such debris. The legend describes the horrific conditions they experienced during the Younger Dryas, followed by the sudden airburst. As the princess knelt before the altar, her mind turned to the plight of her dying people. It had been brutally cold for as long as anyone could remember, and there had been no summer that year and not much harvest. She chanted and prayed to the Great Spirit to help them through the winter season that had come very early again. Every day seemed colder than the last. Every week, a few more of her people weakened and fell ill. After her chanting, she wondered if the Great Spirit was listening any more. Then she heard a loud, high screaming noise and an enormous explosion, and then more blasts, one after another. To the east, an immense bluish-white stream cloud billowed high up into the noon sky above the crest of the nearby hill, stream pouring out of the ocean. That afternoon, the princess and her tribe members left the camp to see what had happened. They found that the explosions had burned giant holes into the ground, that the rain-swollen streams cascade into them. The rains continued every day for 13 moons, so that soon the craters were full. Thus the rain continued for 13 days as the atmosphere purged all the steam created by the airburst. The giant hole closest to their camp became a huge 15-mile-long inland lake. They called it Matamuskeet, the lake on the hill, and named their tribe after it. Thanks to the falling stars, which brought much-needed water, they had survived. Out of seeming catastrophe came new life. The story from a tribe on the eastern seaboard is the only one to survive, suggesting the second cataclysm did not affect North America on the same widespread scale as the first disaster. India. As you have learned, Vishnu came in the form of a fish to warn the Indian hero Manu that a flood was coming. Matsya, the fish, was Vishnu's first avatar. In the legend about the sinking Devaraka, Vishnu appeared as Krishna, his 8th avatar, meaning he had reincarnated, then died 7 times since appearing as a fish, showing that Devaraka sank in the second flood. This span of time, denoting 2 floods associated with 2 different avatars of Vishnu, aligns with the Greek account of the 2 floods associated with 2 different kings of Argos. Being located at the southernmost tip of Asia, India and Sri Lanka were spared the devastating firestorm of the passing meteor. China. From Chinu comes the myth of Kuafu, which explains that one day Kuafu decided to chase and catch the sun. He followed the sun from the east to the west, draining the Yellow River and the Wee River to quench his burning thirst. However, the big rivers were unable to satisfy him. As he searched for more water, he eventually died of dehydration. This tale is plainly an allegory for a celestial body traveling westward through the sky and boiling away from the water, boiling away the water from all the rivers in its path. The Chinese experienced this in the afternoon as the sun was in the west, while the Greeks witnessed the ball of fire emerge from the sun in the east, being that their day was just beginning. These differences in eyewitness accounts perfectly align with their positions on the earth as the event unfolded. But there is more, dear seeker. For if you consider all of these accounts closely along with the modern map of the Earth's surface, you will make an astounding discovery. The path from the Gobi Desert in China across the Arabian Peninsula to the Sahara in North Africa is one uninterrupted continent spanning wasteland, a vast desert left in the wake of a passing meteor. The Greeks believed the burning of Pantheon created the Sahara, and this event seems to have spawned deserts on the Asian continent as well. Well, that makes sense to me, how the Sahara Desert came to be basically a dry, barren wasteland. A modern parallel. To understand the effect and character of the airburst, consider two events in modern Russia. The two events are called Tunguska and Chelyabinsk. I think is how you pronounce that. Chelyabinsk, I think is how it's pronounced. The Tunguska event happened in 1908 in the far reaches of Russia near the Podkamenya Tunguska River. And at that time, no one knew what had happened. Your scientists today believe that when Earth passed through this toroid meteor stream, a meteor measuring 50 to 60 meters entered the atmosphere at a speed of 27 kilometers per second, exploded, and leveled thousands of square kilometers of trees. To this day, none grow in that torched space, leaving a large bare circle. Tunguska represents the worst cosmic disaster humans have experienced in the modern industrial era. One study estimated its blast at 10 to 20 megatons, enough force to obliterate an area the size of Manhattan or London. Despite its large effect on the forest, this event is dwarfed in size by the impact at the beginning of the Bronze Age, which collectively released hundreds of megatons of energy all over the world, akin to a global nuclear war. Scientists have tried to discern when and under what circumstances the torrid meteor stream came to be, estimating a comet reached the vicinity of Earth 20,000 years ago, broke into pieces, and formed the debris stream, some of which has hit Earth and some of which still circulates in the solar system. The debris that did not impact any planets settled into a high eccentric orbit, crossing that of the Earth and reaching almost all the way to Jupiter. Another likely torrid meteor entered Earth's atmosphere in the year 2013, again exploding over Russia, this time over the southern Ural region near Chelyabinsk. People describe something flying overhead, blowing the windows out of their houses, and spontaneously incinerating trees and other objects. These accounts of the smaller scale event corroborate the stories of the cataclysm ending the Younger Dryas period and beginning of the Iron Age. The Atlanteans made their prophecies about the second cataclysm because they had been tracking the torrid meteor stream with their sophisticated astronomy. They knew Earth was no longer in a safe cosmic space, as evidenced by events to this day like the Chelyabinsk and the Tunguska. We are gods now, or we are the gods now. Whatever portions of the Atlantean Empire that survived the flooding 12,800 years ago were burned to the ground at the beginning of the Iron Age. Egypt was also in the path of infernal destruction, so the Atlanteans' second civilization was destroyed along with the first. The Atlanteans' response was to become a fully space-faring civilization, building on the technology Enoch had described. When the Atlanteans took Enoch to the ends of the earth, their craft could orbit the planet but not fully leave, which is why they escaped Atlantis by setting up a second civilization in Egypt rather than on another planet. By the end of the Younger Dryas, however, they had fine-tuned their technology, enabling them to depart Earth completely. It would be hard to relay to you the sadness the Atlanteans felt as their entire homeland was incinerated by the passing comet. For millennia, they had been custodians of the earth and caretakers of humanity. That time had now come to an end, and to focus their remaining resources on off-planet colonies not plagued by this debris field present in the solar system, the Atlanteans took their leave of Earth to join their brethren in the cosmos, the colonies in the Pleiades star cluster they had begun after achieving interstellar travel. Perhaps you are wondering, seeker of truth, why the Atlanteans chose the Pleiades? Unlike many constellations, the Pleiades truly are a close grouping of stars consisting of not only the 7 visible to the naked eye, but hundreds more. The Atlanteans, with their advanced astronomy, were certainly aware of this fact and would also have calculated their relative proximity, 450 light-years from Earth. The cluster is dominated by young blue stars, providing ample opportunity for them to find planets devoid of other intelligent life suitable for colonization. From the Atlanteans' journey to the Pleiades leaped folklore spanning all ages and cultures across the world, with cultures such as the Hopi even crediting the constellation as the home of their gods. The Atlanteans still had a concern for what happened on Earth, as we shall discuss at some time in the future, and what they witnessed likely saddened them even further. For not long after the Atlanteans departed, their evil Nephilim relatives sensed a power vacuum and a momentous opportunity. Over the ensuing millennia, they spread from Mesopotamia back to North Africa and then to all corners of the planet, seeking to usurp the Atlanteans' holy centers and the goodwill they had sown amongst the still primitive human tribes. In their relatives' place, the Nephilim set themselves up as, quote-unquote, with a lowercase g, gods, bringing them evil practices such as ritual human sacrifice and cannibalism, as well as their traditions in megalithic architecture and mummification. As you shall learn, evidence of the Nephilim's infiltration is found on virtually every continent and continues to be this day. Pretty interesting stuff so far. All right, let's continue. The Neolithic Age. According to historians, the Neolithic Age is when modern civilization began. The air burst over the Atlantic Ocean at the end of the Younger Dryas created a great deal of steam, which caused the Earth to begin warming rapidly. Areas across the globe that were not incinerated by the meteor actually benefited from the new environment. The planet entered the Holocene period and became much more hospitable for more people, animals, and plant life in more places. Rising sea levels brought about the warming. The warming changed the coastlines and allowed ships to access areas further inland. The Nephilim took full advantage of these new waterways and sailed their ships to previously unexplored locations across the planet. Agriculture supposedly started in the Levant during this time, though you know it originated much earlier with the Atlanteans, who taught it to Adam, who then shared it with his Natufian brethren. By the Holocene, however, the Natufians had disappeared from the Levant. According to your anthropologies, who call the survivors of the unimaginable name Pre-Pottery Neolithic A, followed by B, settlements like Abu Huraira had been completely destroyed in the first flood, but the Nephilim still inhabited that area and became the city of Jericho. During this time period, the Nephilim embarked upon major construction venture, building temples around northern Mesopotamia, which is now southeastern Turkey. Your scientists have recently made discoveries in this area, the most famous having been found in 1995, Göbekli Tepe, a structure 20 times larger and 6,000 years older than Stonehenge, that likewise surpasses Stonehenge in the quality of its stonework. Göbekli Tepe is one complex among a dozen found in the area surrounding the plain of Haran, which includes an old dried-up riverbed that once joined the Euphrates. Today, this region is fertile farmland, but in the days of the Nephilim around 11,600 years ago, the plain of Haran was a lake, and the surrounding land served as their base of operations for training the rulers who would usurp the Atlanteans as teachers of humanity and then go to dominate societies around the world. Training sites such as Göbekli Tepe mark the beginning of the elite ruling class academies still in use today. A record of this site preserved in the oldest extant literary work, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Epic of Gilgamesh. At the beginning of the Epic, Gilgamesh was a lascivious king who slept with brides on the day of their marriage. The origin of prima noctis, consistent with other descriptions of Nephilim, he was a raging bull who fought indiscriminately and exploited those around him. To counterbalance Gilgamesh, the gods created his opposite, Enkidu, a primitive man akin to Tarzan. Quite the opposite of a king, Enkidu wore a loincloth, and he had seen a giant even stronger than Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh charged one of his priestesses of Ishtar to find Enkidu and bring him back. She tamed him by having sexual relations with him for a week, at which point he agreed to join civilization. Upon meeting, Enkidu and Gilgamesh brawled in the streets, knocking down buildings, throwing each other through huts, and destroying carts. The oxen and horses were terrified and ran away. Finally, the fight ended in a stalemate, and the two shook hands, becoming best friends. However, Enkidu subsequently fell ill and died. So despondent was Gilgamesh over the loss of his friend that he embarked on a quest to find Utnapishtim, the Mesopotamian version of Noah, and legendary survivor of the Great Flood, who had been granted immortality by the gods. Having faced the death of his friend, Gilgamesh wanted immortality for himself. I've talked about this before, about how the gods would grant people immortality. I think they just understood how to mess with the chromosomes and the telomeres and just do some quick genetic mutations or some quick genetic engineering, and boom, you got immortality. I think it's just like a switch that you can turn on and off if you understand how to do it. Gilgamesh found Utnapishtim. He did not find the way to become immortal. The flood hero told Gilgamesh that his own immortality came as a gift from the gods, and that he could not help Gilgamesh gain such a gift for himself. However, Utnapishtim showed him a plant that, when consumed, lifted the fear of death. This exchange gave rise to the sacraments, of which you shall learn more in Book 4. Gilgamesh also learned about the Great Cataclysm and what the world looked like before, as well as construction techniques for temples and other buildings, rites, and sacraments. In short, from Utnapishtim, he gained all of the societal wisdom the Mesopotamians ascribed him. Utnapishtim told Gilgamesh about his journey to the Persian Gulf, carried downstream by the rushing floodwaters. The gods rescued him and took him to the source of the rivers, to a site on what was then the Lake of Haran, and not a plain, which is a long but passable journey by boat from the Persian Gulf. Gilgamesh's quest began at Uruk, on the shores of the Euphrates, and he journeyed up the great river until he came to a large body of water, the Lake of Haran, and met Urshanabi, the boatman, who told Gilgamesh he needed 200 long poles to help him paddle swiftly because they would sail through a noxious spot in the lake, and if they lingered too long, they would die. An underwater fissure existed at that spot with volcanic gases rising up, sulfuric acid strong enough to dissolve the boat and kill the person who breathed the fumes. According to the Bible, by the time of Abraham, this lake had already dried up, and Abraham lived in its former location. Because of the legend of the evil, noxious spot, the people built holy structures, towers, and temples to consecrate it. Lest you miss the point, here is the true meaning of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh was a Nephilim king of Uruk, near the Euphrates, and was 2/3 God, quote-unquote, lowercase g, God. This epic memorializes his journey to Göbekli Tepe to learn from the academic Nephilim how to be a ruler. The dispersal. When the Lake of Haran dried up around 8,000 years ago, the structures were no longer accessible by ship, so the Nephilim abandoned the region. Their dispersal coincides with the genetic record, which shows arrivals of the E-M81 haplogroup among populations all through the Mediterranean and into South America over the next 1,000 or so years. As the Nephilim dispersed, they recaptured North Africa and parts of Greece, leaving their genetic, cultural, and architectural fingerprints everywhere they want. There are many ancient megalithic structures in Greece predating any known habitation by the Greeks, such as the Pyramid of Hellinikon, which is over 5,000 years old and located near the site of Argos, and the Hypogeum of Hal-Salpheni, a huge underground temple on Malta. In point of fact, some of the oldest structures in all of the Mediterranean are on Malta, and to this day, your scholars ponder who ever built them. Genetic markers. When the Watchers left the Maghreb and moved to the Levant during the Silver Age, they brought with them many cultural practices, including cattle farming. In their genetic makeup, they also brought lactase persistence, the production of the lactase enzyme into adulthood. Around age 8, many human beings stopped producing lactase and became lactose intolerant, but those with lactase persistence, like the Watchers and their Nephilim offspring, can drink milk their entire lives without ill effects. Well, that's kind of funny. So if you hear that, if you can drink milk your entire life and you're not lactose intolerant, you got some of the Watchers and the Nephilim DNA in you, according to this. Before the Nephilim dispersal at the beginning of the Neolithic Age, the majority of human beings suffered from lactose intolerance as adults. Afterwards, however, the genetic mutation that allows for lactose persistence spread back to North Africa and then beyond, following the Nephilim's movements to new regions and interbreeding with the local populations. Your scientists have failed to grasp the genetic and cultural relationship between the Levant and North Africa, so they assert lactase persistence emerged independently and simultaneously in these regions. In reality, it began with the Atlanteans in North Africa, who carried it into Levant by the fallen Watchers and then returned during the Neolithic Age when Nephilim started spreading across the globe. There are 5 genetic variants producing lactase persistence, and Africa is the only continent upon which your scientists have found all 5. As Nephilim encountered primitive humans who were lactose intolerant, these less advanced societies thought it miraculous that white giant humans could drink milk as adults without becoming violently ill. Thinking these people had to be deities with supernatural powers, primitive humans started making offerings consisting of milk and roasted meat to the quote-unquote gods, a practice that continued long after in many religions. Along with the lactase persistence mutation in E-M81 gene follows the Nephilim. With 2,000 years of the abandonment of Göbekli Tepe, 3 major cultures emerged in the Maghreb: Kapsian, Mechta, Afalu, and Kefion, all of which are Nephilim cultures with strong signals of the E-M181 haplogroup. As one modern study states, mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome haplogroup evidence suggests either a population replacement or an important genetic influx into Morocco between 5,000 and 3,000 BCE through 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, associated with the back migration to Africa from Eurasia. It is in this place and time where archaeologists unearth the world's oldest mummy at Yuan Muhugiab, Libya. So Yuan Muhugiab in Libya, which predates any known mummification by the Egyptians by 1,000 years. Most Maghrabian men today are either E-M81 or E-M78, the former being the Nephilim, descendants of the Kronos, returning home, and the latter being the line of Adam, descendants of Enoch, who stay in North America. A genetic study in the British Isles found that more than 1% of all Scotsmen are direct descendants of the Berber Tuareg tribesmen of the Sahara, a lineage which is around 5,600 years old. Your scientists call the E-M81 the Berber gene, so this data corroborates the Nephilim arrival in the British Isles 5,600 years ago. They are the source of the red-haired megalithic building druids, known to the ancient Greeks as Hyperboreans, constructors of Stonehenge, and the inventor of the horrific Wicker Man ritual sacrifice of humans and animals by fire. Along with the E-M81 gene, they also brought the Afro-Asiatic language, which by point had evolved through ancient Semitic and Celtic language still spoken today. Celtic presence is confirmed by your scientists stretching from Ireland through Iberia all the way to ancient Scythia, where burial sites of sacrificed children and adults have been found. Architectural markers. Beyond the Mediterranean, the Nephilim ventured east and west. Evidence of their presence in China dates over 8,000 years ago, where they left behind dozens of pyramids near Xi'an, or Qi, or Xi'An. I think it's Qi'an. One rumored to be over twice the height of the Great Pyramid of Giza, as well as a 4,000-year-old auburn-haired mummies, which are found in the Tarim Basin in present-day Xinjiang. Yeah, you can see those pyramids in Asia on Google Earth. The government has them totally closed off. No one's allowed to go see them. They continued east all the way to the Bada Valley in modern-day Sulawesi, Indonesia, where a similar megalithic culture exists to this day in the Sumba people. They represent the easternmost reach of the old Nephilim kingdom. To the west, in the Canary Islands, where the pyramids of Guimar and the Guanche Indians, white people with blonde or auburn red hair of the E-M81 haplogroup who practiced mummification and the occasional human sacrifice. Their own legends state they arrived in ships long ago, so far in the past that they did not remember when. Islamic sailors encountered white people on the Canary Islands and left peacefully, unlike the Spanish. A love poem written by Spanish historian and Dr. Antonio de Viana about the Guanche Princess Dacil, or Dacil, in 1604 confirms the Nephilim-like appearance of the Guanche people. Long hair, more golden than the sun. Eyebrows, subtle, of the same golden color, that like the golden arches and correspond to the brown eyelashes to her semblance. Beautiful eyes like emeralds enclosed by transparent crystals, and shine rose circles as beautiful as flowers on her cheeks. Sharp nose, and proportion to a graceful mouth with thick lips, that had made of the purest fine coral. Beautiful face, the color of snow, with blood and fire intermixed. In the Azores are pyramids that look like the modestly sized step pyramid on Tenerife. The Portuguese government avoids talking about these pyramids because it wants to maintain the national myth that the Portuguese discovered the islands. However, also in the Azores, the ancient iron arrowheads and other evidence of inhabitants long before the Portuguese. There is no iron in the Canary Islands or Azores, so the iron arrowheads found there were brought from somewhere else. In the Amazon, a fully developed megalithic civilization built on the city of Caral 5,500 years ago, where archaeologists have found ancient pyramids on the coastline of Peru, but by the Norte Chico civilization and the Sechin people built a similar, even older megalithic civilization at Sechin Bajo. The Amazonians' chief deity is Viracocha, a character who appears in the other Mesoamerican myths as Kukulkan and Quetzalcoatl. In actuality, he was an Atlantean whose role was later usurped by a Nephilim. Viracocha is a Zeus-like figure, a bearded man wielding a thunderbolt who takes frequent sojourns disguised as a vagabond to observe human morality and teach the arts of civilization. Like Poseidon, he is intimately associated with the sea and even walks on water like Jesus Christ. His first creations were giants who behaved very badly, so he destroyed them in a massive flood. In what is now the Ica region of Peru, the ancient Paracas cultures arose, and they too have evidence of megalithic structures. There you will find the Paracas candelabra, a large geoglyph that resembles the ancient Phoenician depiction of the goddess Tanit, consort of their chief god Baal, to whom they sacrificed children. Beyond South America, the Nephilim traveled even farther west to Easter Island, where they established another culture who built the Moai, which looked much like the Bada Valley megaliths, men standing with their arms clasped in front of them or holding a phallus similar to the statues found at Göbekli Tepe. Urfa Man, found the same region, also has hands clasped in front in a similar manner, and thought this statue as sans phallus. It may be that this appendage wore off. Another similarity across the megalithic structures is the recurring motif of the chevron dress, as appears in the pillars of Göbekli Tepe, the megaliths of Bada Valley and Mani Mayo on Easter Island. The Nephilim influence is also clear in the advanced stonework that arose simultaneously at sites in Mesopotamia, Peru, and Egypt 5,000 to 5,500 years ago. There is even evidence in the Levant of impossibly huge stones being cut and moved at the ancient site of Baalbek, upon which the Romans later built a temple to Jupiter. But the foundation of the entire temple complex are much older and likely Phoenician. Within these foundations are 3 stones called a trilithon, each weighing over 1,000 tons. A nearby quarry contained 2 other, even bigger stones that were destined for the complex. Had these civilizations evolved naturally instead of with the exported knowledge of the Nephilim, your scientists would have seen a progression from working with tiny stones up to building more complicated projects. A society cannot go from nothing to building Caral, for example, on the first attempt. The Caral pyramid is as old and big as the one in Giza. Similarly, in Giza, the Egyptians' abilities to work with stone emerged fully formed and then slowly degenerated over millennia, as the Nephilim were absorbed into the local culture and lost their connection to the Atlantean knowledge. The Old Kingdom contained stonework never attempted again on the scales both large and small, including plates and delicate vases cut from the diorite, the hard type of granite. To this day, humans do not have tools or skills to replicate the work. The skulls of the kings. In addition to their stone-working skills, the Nephilim apparently passed on their fair skin, light-colored hair, and genetic mutations to the Paracas people living in Peru. Accounts of the Spanish conquistadors reveal that the ruling class in Peru resembled the Nephilim. Pedro Pizarro wrote in his diary, "The people of the kingdom of Peru were white, swarthy in color, and among them the lords and ladies were whiter than Spaniards. I saw in this land an Indian woman and her child would not stand out among the white blondes. These people, the upper class, say that they were the children of the idols." Skulls from this region have been recorded, and some of them do indeed show evidence of blonde and auburn hair. Some of these light-haired skulls, and also elongated skulls, and in some cases even missing the sagittal suture. These mutations likely a form of macrocephaly manifested through generations of inbreeding. Curiously, other skulls have been recovered that show evidence of cradle boarding, a practice one might expect the ruled class to follow in an effort to imitate their long-headed rulers. None of these cradle-boarded skulls have blonde hair or auburn hair, however, contributing to the theory that the mutation came from outsiders, not someone native to the Paracas region where the dominant hair color is black. From whence did these outsiders come? Mitochondrial DNA has shown that these elongated skulls belong to Canaanites from Levant, the homeland of the Nephilim. The elongated skull mutation also appeared in Egypt in the line of Akhenaten, the Egyptian pharaoh who tried to introduce a solar deity named Aten as the one and only god of the Egyptians. For various reasons, among them moving the capital city of Egypt to Amarna, Akhenaten was very unpopular, so much that the statues of Akhenaten and his entire family line have had their faces chiseled off as if to erase them from history. Surviving illustrations reveal that both Akhenaten's daughters had large cone-shaped heads even as infants. His son, Tutankhamun, did not appear to present the same genetic mutation, though he did suffer from a host of other genetic defects as a result of inbreeding. Everywhere you find the practice of cranial deformation, whether in the Peruvian Paracas culture over 2,000 years ago or in Egypt 3,500 years ago, it probably started among the people who wanted to emulate Nephilim with this mutation of the skull elongation. If the native people themselves didn't mate with and inherit the mutation from a member of the ruling class, they may have engaged in the practice of cradle boarding to deform the heads of their offspring in order to emulate their rulers and make them appear as royalty. In addition to the stories of Peruvian white Indians with light hair and eyes. There is widespread evidence that cannibalism and human sacrifice were practiced among these tribes, traditions learned from the Nephilim. Cannibalism was not as common, but it was practiced by the Achi Indians in particular. Pizarro wrote in his diary, and likewise, there were 3 or 4 boys, Indians of the land, whom they captured abroad the Balsas, as well as some others whom the Indians gave to them to eat, thinking that the Spaniards were eaters of flesh, human flesh. When the Spaniards came, the Peruvians saw that they were white, like the old gods, and assumed that they would like to eat human beings too. Fire and brimstone. Meteor impacts did not end with the ones previously described, as the torrid meteors came down repeatedly throughout the Iron Age. You have no doubt heard of Sodom and Gomorrah, in the book of Genesis. The real destruction resulted from a meteor, which had been accurately dated to 3,700 years ago. Archaeologists found a site of Sodom and confirmed a Tunguska-like airburst caused its demise. Physically, Sodom existed at the site of Tel El Haman, just northeast of the Dead Sea, on the opposite side of the Jordan River Valley from Jericho. Tells are mounds that form on flat land as people move in, build structures, live, accumulate garbage, and then build once more on top of those mounds. When archaeologists look for ancient settlements, they locate and dig into tells, finding pottery, arrowheads, soot from fires, and so on. As described in Genesis, watchers came the night before the airburst and warned Lot to escape immediately. As quickly as possible without wasting time or looking back, Lot made haste, but his wife did not. And when she looked back, she was instantly incinerated by the meteor, appearing for a moment as a quote-unquote pillar of ash in the shape of her body, fully formed, described in the Bible as a pillar of salt. Sons of Anak. The ruling Nephilim class survived the cataclysm's beginning and the ending of the Younger Dryas, and they went on to establish the civilization of Phoenicia 4,000 years ago. Their exploits are recorded in the Hebrew accounts known as the Torah or the Pentateuch, which is what you may know as the first 5 books of the Old Testament. In the same way that Ovid, Diodorus, and Plato corroborate historical events surrounding the Atlanteans, the Hebrew works confirm the connection of the sons of Anak with their Nephilim ancestors. As Greek mythology and Atlanteans' history overlap, so does the history of the people known as the Canaanites and the Phoenicians overlap with that of the Nephilim, for they are one and the same people. The Bible mentions the connection in the book of Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Jeremiah, and a corroborating story is found in the apocryphal book of Jubilees. Here are but 2 examples. This is quoting from the book of Numbers, chapter 13, verse 33, King James Bible. And there we saw giants, in parentheses Nephilim, the sons of Anak, which come from the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so were we in their sight. Then the next one's quoting from the book of Deuteronomy. Hear, O Israel, thou art to pass over Jordan this day, to go in to possess nations greater and mightier than thyself, cities great and fenced up to heaven, a people great and tall, the children of the Anakims, whom thou knowest, and of whom thou hast heard say, who can stand before the children of Anak? The sons of Anak, or Anakites, were the Nephilim descendants, the Canaanite ruling class. Throughout present-day Syria, Lebanon, and Israel, in what was then known as the land of Canaan, there existed a network of Phoenician cities. To this day, Lebanon and Syria have lands that historically were part of Canaan, and that state of Israel wants them. Understanding the history can help you understand the modern age. The Phoenicians were not a civilization as you traditionally understand civilizations. Rather, they were loosely federated independent city-states without a central government, as in Greece. They were colonizers of the Mediterranean and established and expanded a massive trade empire. They were well known throughout the ancient world as being master sailors and navigators, and the Egyptians hired them to build their boats. As recorded by Herodotus in Book 4 of the Histories, Pharaoh Necho II also commissioned them to circumnavigate Africa 2,600 years ago in the reverse direction of the Watcher's journey described in the Silver Age account. One particular practice that connects the Phoenicians to their Nephilim ancestors is the murdering and eating of children. Oh, kind of like all that stuff going on today with the government. You see where all this comes from? The Phoenicians and their colonies, chiefly Carthage, the largest and most successful of them, carried out child sacrifices to the god Baal on a massive scale, particularly in the valley of Hinnom, also called Gehenna in Jerusalem. In the Bible, quote-unquote, God calls this region the Valley of Slaughter. In Deuteronomy, Numbers, and Jeremiah, God repeatedly warns the Israelites not to worship in the Canaanite way because they trick people into committing awful, sinful acts. Enoch, too, said the fallen watchers would trick a person into sacrificing to demons as gods. Thus, God repeatedly ordered the extermination of the Canaanites, wanting to wipe these people from the face of the earth because they would not give up this horrifying practice. Still going on today. Plato and Diodorus mentioned the slaughter as well. In Minos, Plato discussed the Carthaginian and Phoenician practice of killing babies. In Book 20 of the Bibliotheca Historica, Diodorus mentioned that these same people made sacrifices to Cronus, whom the Carthaginians and Israelites called Baal, according to the Bible. One report underscores the magnitude of these sacrifices, stating that they killed tens of thousands of babies over the course of several centuries, averaging dozens per week. This same paper also enumerates that many child burial sites that have been located at Phoenician colonies throughout the Mediterranean, including Africa, Sicily, Sardinia, and Malta. In all of these cultures, sacrifices were made to the same deity, known by different names. Kronos by the Greeks, Baal as the Carthaginians, Enlil as the Mesopotamians, El in the Hebrew, and Saturn from the Romans have always been linked. After they killed a baby, they would throw the body into the fire and burn it, then gather the remains into an urn and bury it in the tofets of cemeteries. Sometimes they would sacrifice an animal alongside the child, burning both and putting them into the urn together, demonstrating a view that humans are no different from or more deserving than animals. Academics have manufactured a debate regarding whether or not these were actual child sacrifices as opposed to stillbirths. However, the babies were uniformly killed between 2 and 3 months of age, so they were not born dead, a fact that is further supported by the presence of teeth in the remains. These were living, viable beings who were murdered. This vile practice started among the fallen watchers who believed that if they sacrificed the soul to God and consumed the body, that act of taking their life force of a child would extend their own life and confer other benefactions. Young children, they believed, allowed the extraction of the greatest benefit. Well, that is exactly incongruent with everything happening today with the government and the adrenochrome harvesting and how they believe it gives them like this extended youthful appearance, and they get high off it. Like all the stuff happening today, like it all traces back to these ancient bloodlines, the Nephilim, the Anunnaki, the Watchers. Everything we have comes from these bloodlines. Our governments, our system of central banking, the religions, all of them. All right, let's continue. The Phoenicians were close to the Egyptians both physically and culturally, and Phoenician iconography looks quite similar to Egyptian iconography. At one point, the Phoenicians invaded Egypt and took over a large portion of it. The Canaanite rulers were known as the Hyksos, or the Hyksos, and tried to implement many unwanted practices, but they were seen as bloodthirsty and corrupt and were eventually expelled from Egypt. The dynasty that assumed rule over Egypt after the expulsion of the Hyksos is the one that eventually produced Akhenaten, whose daughters had the conical heads, or the conical heads. Did the Egyptians truly succeed at driving out the Nephilim, or had they become embedded by intermarrying with the Egyptian family who succeeded the Hyksos? Judging from the depictions of Akhenaten's daughters, the Nephilim persisted. That's why they all have those elongated skulls. All right, the next part in this chapter is called Finding Cerne. I think it's Cerne. It's Cerne, and there's like a little like punctuation thing on top of the E. So I think it's Cerne or Cerne, how you pronounce this. Bear with me, doing my best with the languages in this book. There's a lot of difficult words that I've never heard before in here. By 2,600 years ago, Phoenicia had begun to fade in economic and military power. Still, they knew from their fallen watcher heritage that one could circumnavigate Africa, and they were quite comfortable sailing out beyond the Pillars of Hercules, even establishing trade routes with people living on the Atlantic coast of Africa, as noted by Herodotus. A century after the Phoenician circumnavigation, Hanno, a high-ranking Carthaginian, voyaged out beyond the Pillars of Hercules and down the African coast with 60 ships and 30,000 people, founding colonies and meeting myriad tribesmen. Hanno kept a periplus, a captain's log, which was later installed in a public temple to Baal in Carthage, where people could read the account of this great and legendary journey of the ancient world. The original periplus in the temple was later destroyed by the Romans, but translations and copies were passed down through the generations in other ways. According to this document, Hanno sailed east into Africa, arrived in a bay, found a circular island, and started a colony called Cerne. Clearly, he traveled up the mighty Tamanrasset River to the Richa structure. Reconstructed maps of Hanno's journey place Cerne on the African coast, precisely where one finds the Cap Timiris Canyon, or the Cap Timiris Canyon mouth of the ancient Tamanrasset and gateway to Atlantis. As the Carthaginian Hanno had access to the ancient Phoenician records and knew that the Richa structure was the site of the Atlantean city called Cerne, so he called his colony by the same name. Centuries after Hanno took this journey, Diodorus retrieved the account of Dionysius Scytobrachion from the Library of Alexandria and noticed that the Atlanteans lost one of their cities to the Libyan Amazonians, a city named Cerne. In the account of Dionysius, Diodorus relays how the Atlanteans were invaded, were invaded by Libyan Amazonians, an army of women who conquered the city of Cerne, leading the Atlanteans to surrender the whole empire. Diodorus says the Amazonians came from a marsh named Tritonus that was destroyed in a cataclysm, making it a pre-flood tale. The marsh Tritonus was formed into the lake Tritonius, on the same site with which the Greeks were familiar. The tidal wave turned into a lake, but it has long since dried up and disappeared along with the Tamanrasset. No one has done an archaeological excavation in the Risha structure, and in the past 20 years, only people have gone there to do research, or only 2 people have gone there to do research. You know, one of my buddies, his name is Josh Sigurdsson. He's got he had this big YouTube channel called World Alternative Media. He got deleted; they censored him, but he actually went there. It took him like 2 weeks to even get to it. He'd sleep in like these grimy hotels and take buses, and had like an AK-47 pointed at him with like $10,000 worth of camera equipment, and they were going to go out there and try to use one of those. I think it's called like a seismometer, or one of those machines that like takes an X-ray of what's underneath the ground, but the government wouldn't let him. But he has this whole trip documented on, he's probably find it on Rumble. He got deleted from YouTube, but you could probably find it on Rumble. But he went out there and tried to find this stuff. Of those 2, one man found pottery from Mesoamerica dating at the time of the Carthaginian colony, demonstrating they had established trade with other Nephilim colonies in the Americas. Roman conquest of Libya. Though the Carthaginians were great sailors and traders with access to people and goods around the world, they were also cannibals who murdered children, and as a result, many people feared them and wanted them eliminated. The Romans took up this cause 2,250 years ago and warred against these people in the hope of exterminating them as the Hebrew God wished, the result being the Punic Wars, thus referred to because the Phoenicians and their colonies practiced the Punic religion. Hannibal, whose name meant beloved of Baal, invaded the almost sacked Rome during that time, but the Romans eventually defeated the Carthaginians, sacked the city of Carthage in what is now Tunisia, and destroyed everything, including its giant library, which contained all their knowledge about Atlantis. The typical Roman conquest involved deposing the local ruler and annexing the kingdom into Rome. For Romans were not generally destroyers, but rather subjects of a conglomerate of other states. Their treatment of Carthage was completely unique. They systematically combed the city for days, killing everyone they found and setting fire to the buildings as they passed. Unfortunately, the Romans failed in their quest. At least one E-M18 man or family escaped the destruction, as evidenced by the fact that a subclade of E-M81, known as E-M183, survived in North Africa. Broadly speaking, E-M18 is a Nephilim haplogroup, and E-M183 is a Carthaginian line that is also found in the Guanche mummies of Tenerife on the Canary Islands. As already mentioned by the present day, the E-M183, the Carthaginian subclade of E-M81, sons of Cronus, and E-M78, the sons of Adam, make up the most of the men in North America. 71% of men in Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya are E-M813. West of Carthage was the state of Numidia, and further westward was an ancient country of Mauritania, the Morai people. Mauritania is known to be a land of great wisdom, and in particular, King Juba II was famous as being a very wise king. Mauritanians have a founding legend just as the Greeks do, a story so old they do not know when their society began, and their legendary founder was King Atlas, who invented the celestial sphere and the science of astronomy, a remarkable similarity to the Atlantean king who bears the same name. In the intervening 2,000 years, the Nephilim descendants of Cronus who escaped the Roman conquest have continued to infiltrate your most important and powerful institutions, including secret societies, intelligence, academia, and government bureaucracies, as will become clear in Book 3. Very interesting stuff. That is the end of Chapter 5. And we're going to start Chapter 6 in the next upload. Chapter 6 is entitled The New Age, so make sure you stick around, and let me know in the comments what you think of this stuff so far. I mean, I'm really impressed with how much detail this book has gone into about Atlantis and the bloodlines and the gods and the Nephilim, the Anunnaki, and how it all ties into everything that has come to be up to the present day. I mean, this is fascinating stuff.